It's one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. 2,000 kilometres of coral that stretches along the northern coast of Australia. But under the crystal clear water lies a murky reality. Marine life in the Great Barrier Reef is slowly disappearing. Over 2 million tourists venture out each year to swim among the sea life.
Actually, I've heard lots about it for years, so this is kind of like, I guess, Disneyland for divers, I guess.
They take the plunge for an hour-long dive. The Great Barrier Reef is the largest living organism in the world, and for many species, the coral is not only their home, but a vital source of food. Yet despite the bright-coloured plants and animals, the ecosystem is under threat. Margot has been studying the reef for the past 10 years. She's seen marine life die out little by little as the temperature of the water rises.
Everything's dying before our eyes. It's as though the reef is calling for help.
And as a result, parts of the reef are completely lifeless. Fish have fled, the coral has died. Half of the barrier reef has disappeared over the past 30 years as coral bleaching becomes more frequent. When the temperature of the water rises above 30 degrees, the corals expel an algae, causing them to turn completely white. This depletes them of their energy, and many end up dying. Bleaching occurred on an unusually large scale in 2016 and 2017, and the phenomenon is happening in oceans all over the world.
If we lose the coral, we lose a quarter of the habitat available to the fish, meaning a quarter of the fish could die, and then a quarter of the mammals that rely on fish for food could die too. So it starts with the whales who eat the plankton, then it moves on to the sharks, etc.
We want to take you down to Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida, where SpaceX is launching a Falcon Heavy rocket carrying a communications satellite. Let's watch.
15 seconds.
Vehicle's flight pressures.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff.
Vehicle's pitching downrange.
And we're beginning deep throttle. Center core at deep throttle.
T plus 33 seconds into flight. Under the power of 5.1 million pounds of thrust, Falcon Heavy is headed to space. We're throttling down at T plus 40 seconds to prepare for maximum dynamic pressure.
Power and telemetry are nominal.
We're hearing reports. Power and telemetry are nominal.
Vehicle is supersonic.
You may have heard the call out on Net 1. Vehicle is supersonic. Side boosters are throttling back up on power as we're through the period of maximum dynamic pressure. Trajectory looking good. You can hear the applause behind me.
Parts of the northern plains and upper Midwest are digging out from a spring blizzard. We're not exaggerating. The snow is still falling there. One person is dead after a car hit a snow plow in Colorado, and a state of emergency has been declared in Minnesota.
CBS News correspondent Adriana Diaz is in Watertown, South Dakota. She reports the snow has led to concern there might be flooding in the region once it melts.
Vlad and Marie, people in Watertown are going to have to dig out of this today. With all this snowdrift, some people are going to have trouble figuring out which cars are theirs. Now, the winds have died down, but the snow continues to fall. Major roads remain closed in some areas, and thousands are still without power across the region. Cars and big rigs were no match for whiteout snow and powerful wind gusts topping 60 miles per hour. Neither was this Minnesota state trooper as he tried to direct traffic around a jackknifed semi-trailer. The wintry blast shook power lines, freezing some and toppling others. At one point, nearly 77,000 homes and businesses were without power.
We usually don't get this in April.
Here in Watertown, we met Ron Lohr as he tried, perhaps in vain, to clear snow from his yard. It's almost not worth even trying to clear the snow at this point.
No, it really isn't. I'll get out for a while today and come home and spend the rest of the day at home.
Not everyone had that option. With several interstates shut down, more than 100 truck drivers were stranded at this rest stop. So you're sleeping in your truck?
Yes, I am. Yep.
And the blizzard is impacting far more than traffic.
Back home, we're usually farming out in the field, and down here they're farming too, but it's going to be, now with all this extra snow, it's going to be a month yet.
Farmers here in cattle country are scrambling to keep their livestock alive.
When you get 10, 12 inches or more on the ground, it's just tough to work and to make sure they're all right.
Farmers we spoke to told us they had to stay up all night in shifts, checking on their cattle, especially the baby calves that are born this time of year. Some are also worried about flooding because once all this snow melts, it'll turn into water. And they're
Continuing in Health Watch, a mysterious infection traveling around the world has been placed on the CDC's urgent threat list. The fungal infection called Candida auris is resistant to treatment, and the number of cases in New York alone has grown from 1 to 14 in the last year.
Now the CDC is warning healthcare workers to take extra precautions while at work, and they also warn that the epidemic is growing.
Joining us now, internal medicine specialist Dr. Nita Ogden. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
So I was telling Anne-Marie, when I read about this fungal virus in the New York Times, and they described there was a patient that had it, was infected with this virus, and then when the patient left the hospital room, the entire room was a biohazard. It was everywhere. In the ceilings, in the bed, blinds. In the blinds, and it's resistant to treatment.
It's resistant to multiple antifungal drugs that we have, and it's also resistant to all the things that we use to eradicate bacteria and fungal strains in the hospital. There was another case in London when they aerosolized the room with sodium hydroxide. One organism regrew. Candida auris. So this is definitely an alarming development in the global emerging threat of superbugs. It's a little different from what we've heard about in terms of bacteria because it's a fungus. And actually, Candida strains are colonizers of the human body. They live in our gut microbiome, which is another hot topic. This strain is preying on people with weakened immune systems. So who is that? Long-term healthcare facility residents who have catheters, indwelling catheters or IV lines, people in hospitals, ICUs, newborns, and also people who take immunosuppressive drugs for medical illnesses or have diabetes. So those are the people that really are at risk. The greater concern is if we don't curb this rise of superbugs, where's this headed? It's headed towards normal, healthy people with no health problems becoming vulnerable to these type of fungal strains and not having anything in our defenses of antimicrobials and antifungals to fight them.
So what does it look like when you've been infected with this fungus?
Well, to be honest, people are already sick, or they're newborns and too young to say why they're sick. So the main symptoms may be malaise, fever, chills, some kind of vague symptoms, really. And it's really up to healthcare facilities to be on the lookout and to report these kinds of symptoms if they're suspicious to healthcare agencies. So, things can go into effect immediately to prevent the spread.
And we just point out here that nearly half of the patients who contracted the virus died within 90 days. Let's have a real quick discussion about these superbugs that we're hearing more and more about. Is it because over the course of the last 50 years, doctors, medicine specialists have treated us with antibiotics in our bodies, and these bacteria and these funguses have become resistant to that because we're over-prescribing, not prescribing, but we're over, I don't want to use the word over-medicating, but there's a term.
Explain that, because it's a fungus, right? Not a bacteria. So would antibiotics have an impact on its
No,
evolution?
but we do use antifungals. So that is one theory, and that's one of the biggest ones that we've all heard about. However, there's another prevailing theory that scientists believe this is due to agriculture and the use of fungicides to stem rot in plants and crops.
In Spacewatch, a black hole and its shadow have been photographed for the first time ever. An international network of telescopes captured the image. It shows a black hole 55 million light years from Earth in a different galaxy. The black hole is more than 6 billion times the mass of the sun. Researchers discussed their findings earlier today.
We now know clearly that black holes drive large-scale structure in the universe from their home in these galaxies. And we now have an entirely new way of studying general relativity in black holes that we never had before. And as with all great discoveries, this is just the beginning.
Joining us now is CBS space consultant Bill Harwood. Bill, thank you so much for joining us. First, can you explain what exactly are we looking at when we look at that image that we're told is a black hole? What is a black hole?
Well, first of all, we're not really looking at the black hole. We're looking at the event horizon around the black hole. What they call the event horizon is the point of no return. A black hole has such concentrated gravity that nothing can escape it, not even light. And once a particle of light or anything else, an astronaut, for example, crosses the event horizon, that object is lost from the visible universe. So the dark area in the middle of that picture is showing where that boundary lies. And that orange light that's kind of encircling it, those are photons emitted by gas particles, dust particles, that have been accelerated to near light speed just above the event horizon, just before they would be sucked into the black hole and thus out of this universe.
So does that get...
So it's really
do all of those photons and everything that we're seeing there in the light there, are those just getting sucked into the black hole at a faster and faster and faster speed until they are gone forever?
Well, certainly the particles that make that trip across the event horizon are doing just that. The photons we're seeing, of course, managed to escape. They got away before the material fell in, streamed across that 55 million light years, and reached the telescopes making up the Event Horizon telescope that captured this picture. It's a remarkable achievement. By definition, you're not supposed to be able to see black holes, but now they've done it.
So that's why this is so significant, right? We can now for the first time see an image of a black hole. But are they slowly eating the universe, black holes?
No, but they believe that, every major galaxy like the Milky Way has a supermassive black hole in its core. Now what the relationship is, did the black hole form first and then the galaxy, or vice versa? Those are topics still under discussion. But these sorts of black holes are common. There's no threat to us, of course. We're so far away from our own supermassive black hole. But they're very interesting because by studying them with pictures like this, you can really take Einstein's theory of relativity to the extreme limits and really put it to the test. And this picture they took closely matches what computer simulations show based purely on Einstein's equations. So once again, Albert scored another goal, you might say.
Einstein was right. All right, Bill Harwood, thank you so much. Fascinating stuff.
Absolutely.
2 days after a military coup, the leader of Sudan's interim military council has vowed to, quote, uproot the regime. The military forced President Omar al-Bashir from power Thursday, calling for an end to his 30-year rule. It's uncertain whether the move will be enough to end the huge protests by people on the streets who are demanding a civilian government. Andy Moore from our media partners at the BBC has the story.
A new day in Khartoum and a new leader, but the protesters are still on the streets. The new man has already accepted an important resignation, Salah Ghosh, the head of the powerful National Intelligence and Security Service. The crowds are waiting to see what to make of the man now in charge of their country.
Abdel Fattah al-Burhan is the new guy, but who is he? And what will he say and do differently? Will he chant to our slogans or not? We won't deal with him emotionally. We're waiting to hear his first address, and then we'll decide how to deal with him.
It's a great thing for Sudan, and inshallah our hopes will be realised. We're not leaving the streets until everything goes to our advantage.
Sudan's third leader in as many days, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan Abdulrahman, was sworn in late on Friday night. His elevation followed the resignation of the man who led the military coup to topple the president.
I announce as the leader of the Transitional Military Council that I am stepping down from this position to select someone whose expertise and competence I can trust. And on that basis I have chosen the kind brother, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah Abdulrahman Burhan.
Al-Burhan Abdulrahman is seen as further away from the old regime. He's been seen on the streets of Khartoum, engaging with the protesters and trying to win them over. But so far at least that plan doesn't seem to be working. The demonstrators say they will stay on the streets until there's a handover to a civilian government. Andy Moore, BBC News.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. President Trump says he is strongly considering releasing migrants detained at the border into sanctuary cities, which are often controlled by Democrats. It all started with a report by the Washington Post that White House officials were quick to deny. But as Paula Reed reports, President Trump picked up the idea and ran with it.
So we are looking at the possibilities.
President Trump says he's considering whether to release illegal immigrants in detention onto the streets of so-called sanctuary cities.
California certainly is always saying, oh, we want more people. And they want more people in their sanctuary cities. Well, we'll give them more people. We can give them a lot. We can give them an unlimited supply.
California is home to several sanctuary cities which refuse to cooperate with federal immigration officials. Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom fired back at the president's plan today.
It's illegal, it's immoral, it's unethical, it's sophomoric, it's petulant, and it's par for the course.
Transporting migrants from the border to other cities raises practical, legal, and budgetary questions, and the White House initially denied the proposal was under serious consideration. But just hours later, the president said on Twitter it was.
Sanctuary cities that get Americans killed, they're immoral.
As the president renews his focus on immigration ahead of 2020, sanctuary cities are a red meat issue for the president's base.
When you have sanctuary cities, you have crime.
The policy would also drop migrants into traditionally Democratic cities like Oakland. Mayor Libby Schaaf says it would be an abuse of power.
The idea that this administration could use human beings, families, children, to exact political vengeance on enemies is outrageous.
And she defended Oakland's policy not to cooperate with immigration officials.
We believe that we are here to protect and serve all residents of our city.
CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reed joins us now from the North Lawn. Hi, Paula. Why does President Trump want to do this when it would presumably mean letting undocumented immigrants walk free?
What appears the president's motivations are political. Based on his remarks earlier today at the White House, he suggested that this is what states like California get when they don't cooperate with ICE officials. Conveniently for him, this would drop a lot of folks into districts of his Democratic rivals. For example, Nancy Pelosi, whose district is in San Francisco. Now, as you noted, this would also result in some people who are here illegally or awaiting their asylum claims being released. But, Tanya, that is pretty typical because detention facilities are at capacity in most instances. So oftentimes people waiting asylum, they are released back into the community. They're given a court date. But statistically, many of those people never show up to court to continue their proceedings.
And so, Paula, is there any evidence to suggest that these cities cannot handle an influx of migrants?
Well, there's certainly no evidence to suggest that they could. It's unclear how many people we're talking about here, but it also doesn't appear that this is a realistic policy so far. Before the president's remarks, the White House had said this wasn't something that was being seriously considered. The Department of Homeland Security echoed that since the president came out and said, look, I am considering this. The Department of Homeland Security has not come forward and confirmed that it will indeed implement this policy. And I spoke with a senior White House official earlier this week who told me the president is frustrated that that agency has not done a very good job of implementing his immigration policies, and it just doesn't appear that they are completely on board.
So returning now to the legal fight over Julian Assange's possible extradition to the United States. The Justice Department announced hacking conspiracy charges against the WikiLeaks founder yesterday after he was arrested in London.
Federal prosecutors accuse him of conspiring with former Army intelligence officer Chelsea Manning to steal and publish secret military and diplomatic documents back in 2010. The Justice Department called the hack one of the largest compromises of classified information in the history of the United States. CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reed is at the White House with more. So, Paula, if additional charges are filed, do we know what those could be?
We have some idea. Here, what was so interesting is he was just facing one charge of computer intrusion. It had nothing to do with his activities during the 2016 campaign or these larger questions about whether or not he should be charged with espionage. What we know, though, is right now this indictment, as a recovering lawyer, I can tell you, it's a little thin, and they're going to have trouble proving these computer intrusion charges without cooperation from Chelsea Manning. A U.S. official confirms to me he will be charged with additional counts. It's unclear when those will come, but once they do that, they could start to wade into this landmine of questions in the First Amendment and whether or not he should be criminally charged. The reason this initial indictment was so narrow and just this one charge is the prosecutors wanted to blunt any argument that he should be protected under the First Amendment. They didn't want that to delay his extradition.
Right, because if he's being extradited to face a trial and it's believed that it's for political reasons, and you can correct me, then he may not be extradited. He might have a stronger argument. But that makes me wonder, you know, if the U.S. sort of says there's only one charge, he gets extradited, and later on they pile on all these other charges, isn't that sort of maybe, I don't know, using a loophole in the system?
It depends what those charges are. Oftentimes you see that you have to promise you will not pursue the death penalty. For example, in the El Chapo case, in order to get him from Mexico, they needed to promise they would not pursue the death penalty. So sometimes there are assurances you need to grant a foreign country. I would expect that any additional charges would likely be filed before these extradition proceedings get underway, but there is a desire not to have that dragged out for months and months. The U.S. and the U.K. have a pretty friendly extradition treaty, so I think it's going to be months, not years, before he sees the inside of a U.S. courtroom.
So, Paul, let's talk about this. As you know, the president praised WikiLeaks repeatedly while campaigning in 2016. Let's play a little bit of what he said back then.
WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks. They want to distract us from WikiLeaks. It's been amazing what's coming out on WikiLeaks.
Do you still love WikiLeaks?
I know nothing about WikiLeaks. It's not my thing. And I know there is something having to do with Julian Assange. I've been seeing what's happened with Assange, and that will be a determination, I would imagine, mostly by the Attorney General, who's doing an excellent job. So he'll be making a determination. I know nothing really about him. It's not my deal in life.
Now, 75 people have been killed and over 320 wounded in Libya in the last 10 days. That's according to the World Health Organization. The country's ongoing civil war there has been escalating after General Khalifa Haftar, whose forces control eastern Libya, ordered his army to march on the capital. The UN is calling on all parties to the conflict to end hostilities.
Health partners have verified 17 civilian casualties so far, with 7 fatalities, including 3 medical staff. At least 5 ambulances have been hit since the onset of the conflict. We continue to call for a humanitarian pause to allow people to safely evacuate and emergency services to get through, and for all parties to abide by their obligations under international humanitarian law.
Meanwhile, thousands of Libyans have been gathering in Tripoli to protest against renewed fighting in the region. Libya has been in turmoil since the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi back in 2011. Since then, the country has seen the setting up of 2 rival governments, one backed by the UN in Tripoli and the other based in...
Before they even knew what the military was announcing, protesters were already celebrating in the streets of Khartoum. Sudan's defense minister delivered what they had been demanding for months: the removal of President Omar al-Bashir.
As Defense Minister, I declare the fall of the regime and the placing of its leader in a safe place following his arrest.
As for the army's next steps, he said a transitional military council will lead the country for 2 years until elections are held. He announced a 3-month state of emergency, a nationwide ceasefire. He suspended the constitution and imposed a night curfew. And he closed the country's airspace for 24 hours and closed the borders until further notice. The security agency also announced the release of all political prisoners. Protesters have been demanding Bashir's ouster for months, and demonstrations first sparked in December by the rising cost of bread. Since Saturday, thousands have gathered outside the Defense Ministry compound in the capital, where the president lives and where the army headquarters are located. As days went by, the army drew closer to the people, protecting them from Bashir's security forces. But now, despite their joy, protesters are wary. Organizers called for a civilian transitional government and say they're in talks with the military about a transfer of power.
The government is still putting pressure on us. It continues to want to seek control and power over us. The defense minister and Bashir are 2 sides of the same coin. As citizens, we see what's happening. The government is manipulating us.
Several organizers of the protests have rejected the defense minister's announcement, calling on Sudanese to continue their protests.
Now, religious violence is on the rise in France, with a spike in attacks against minorities. However, the lion's share of incidents in the country do target Christians, something that the mainstream media's coverage seems to miss. Charlotte Dubinsky explains.
Anti-religious attacks are taking place on an almost daily basis in France. But while some incidents seem to attract a lot of attention, others are largely being ignored.
According to the French Observatoire de la Christianophobie, February 2019 was the worst month for churches in France since they began collecting data in 2015. But in addition to churches, other public Christian symbols have also been targeted. For example, summit crosses on mountaintops, public crucifixes have been destroyed or vandalized, and public statues of Jesus and the Virgin Mary have been decapitated or destroyed.
And according to the observatory in France, anti-Christian attacks have sharply risen